This time I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Nicholas Ritz. Goes by Nick. He's the lead engineer of the Utility of the Future program through National Grid. He currently supports the Utility of the Future organization for both the metering side and also the home area networking technologies. And since his 6 years at Grid, he's held engineering positions in both lab and testing services and meter engineering. Nick holds his BS degree from St. Bonaventure, and his Master's of Science is from SU. He currently lives in Baldwinsville, although he's happy to tell you of his lovely commutes to Boston. So with that, I'd like to bring up Nick Ritz and get your slides with me.
All right, just again wanted to introduce myself, Nick Ritz, member of the Utility of the Future team for National Grid. Mainly, we're responsible for all smart grid initiatives for both downstate, upstate, and Massachusetts. So my thought before I came here was to give a little history lesson, and I think we did a pretty good job here, but I was going to go into a little bit more detail behind what we currently have and the history behind it. Generally, our network was built in the 1800s behind centralized generation. So we were thinking coal and hydros, and that was pretty much about it. Power is brought to customers over the transmission and distribution networks. For you non-engineers out there, you could think of transmission as a thruway or Interstate 90, and you can think of distribution as the streets that you live on. And you see all the poles and lines and transformers that you drive by every day. The issue is the distribution system right now is set up for one-way power. So it's just from the generation to the end user. There's no flexibility there. And this was fine for about 100 years. But of recent, people have issues with it because they want generation. They want distributed generation. They want power 24/7. They want to be able to plug their electric vehicle. They want to have PV on their house. So that's some of the pushes from National Grid's perspective, from the consumer, on why we need smart grid. Some of the customer end. So you can see the vans down here, and these vans are actually picking up customer information. But actually, before 15 years ago, we actually had people doing these efforts. So we have either people walking or driving and then going to an individual residence or a customer's facility or commercial facility and reading the numbers on that meter, writing it down, bringing it back to the utility. About 15 years ago, National Grid, along with a lot of other utilities, invested in what we call AMR, which is advanced meter reading. So basically, we use trucks and or vans with collectors built into them that actually pick up the one-way transmission that a resident or a commercial meter sends out, and that's it. There's no way to get any information back to the consumer. Now that's fine, it saved us a lot of effort for labor, going house to house. But think about feedback, and we were talking about cell phones. Right now, my cell phone provider, I can actually get online and see pretty much up to the minute what recent calls I made and how much that's associated with my bill. The feedback for this car or this truck or van bringing that usage information, they have to bring it back. They have a monthly route. They download it into the billing system. It could take up to 6 weeks for a consumer to get that feedback. That's not really adequate for me. If I'm concerned how much my basement lights are using, should I upgrade the lighting? It's not very helpful if I'm getting it every 6 weeks. And lastly, most residential customers have no idea the cost of energy that they're using. So our thought is to actually enable time of use rates at the residential level, where a lot of C&I or commercial facilities actually have time of use rates. So when the demand's high, the cost of energy associated is high. So this is what my team and organization organization is looking to do. We're looking to modernize the electric system. And one of the biggest components of that isn't necessarily the end devices or the things on the poles or the things in the substation. We really have a lot of those items. It's enabling the two-way communication in those devices. So having a reclosure with two-way comms in, having a smart meter with two-way comms in, having in-home networking to actually display some of that information. What do we hope to give to the customer? Well, we hope to give them greater choice on when they use energy. What do we hope to give to the utility? Someone that's operating some of the system at this level. But we hope to give them tools so that they can manage the system better with reliability and efficiency. So these are some of the components that we believe are vital when we're talking smart grid. On your left here, customer features. One of the biggest things is we need to know what motivates customers. We need to know what enhances customer service. And again, we think time of use rates all the way down to the residential level are key. And lastly, this is big, education and outreach. I know we talked about that earlier in the earlier presentation, but we actually implemented a new technique, AI, or Appreciative Inquiry Summit. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, but that was very involved in our future development of smart grid. Again, some of the grid features. We hope to improve reliability. We hope to divert capital. So what does that mean? Well, if we're able to shed peaks or move peak demand onto shoulders, we could potentially build less substations or need to purchase less generation. So that's deferring capital. How about workforce optimization? This one is pretty simple for me. If you think of a fault on a distribution line, right now we know about the fault. We have devices in the field that actually tell us there's a fault. It's back to our energy management system. We deploy a trouble truck. But the issue is, we just know about a 10-mile line of where that fault happened. Hopefully with our comms and our grid features that we're going to be proposing in the States, we can actually get that down to 2 to 3 poles where the issue is. So think about the optimization and work or the less redundancy that you need in a field if you're able to localize or actually sectionalize that issue for the field crews. Some of the in-home and building things. Now this one's definitely near and dear to my heart, and I think the utility is playing a big role in this at this point. I'm not positive that down the road we're actually going to be the owners of these type of devices, but I think we're going to help to understand what the consumers actually are interested in through pilots. So display units, web applications, load control devices, and just general over-the-counter or over-the-shelf type of lifestyle and energy improvement technologies we're exploring. And lastly, but definitely most important, is the communications. So again, we're looking at two-way comms. Mainly you can think of the AMI network or a mesh network in the metering space. So as opposed to a truck driving by and collecting that one-way transmission, the meters actually communicate with each other back to National Grid. We want to leverage that technology. We want to leverage the latest protocols like IPv6 and Zigbee in the home. Zigbee in the home is basically like, think of your Bluetooth wireless headset for your phones. It's short range, high frequency, but it collects and it makes a network in your home similar to the AMI network of the meters. And lastly, this kind of quote at the bottom sums all this up pretty well. and it sums up what National Grid's trying to do. We're testing innovation to inform full-scale rollout. So this is the technique, or the new technique, that my team has actually implemented with partnerships throughout the community in Massachusetts specifically. Appreciative inquiry. So we ask the question to ourselves, how can we engage the community? Okay, how can we see what they're interested in, what is important to them, as opposed to just force feeding them technology in the home, on the network, with them having no idea and not being a part of anything. So this technique is, if you break it apart, appreciative is growth or positive thinking, and inquiry is the business question. So putting those two together is our new plan, our new outreach. And it's a big change. So usually changes in organizations, you would start from the top down, or in politics you could say grassroots, they start from the bottom up. This is actually a change from the scale of a whole. So when I say this, it's not mild. We got a whole ecosystem together in several of our regions to develop and plan strategic planning in this one area. When I say ecosystem, I mean everyone from state regulatory, customers, low income, utility members, university members, students at the university, students of high schools, anyone that would be interfacing with that area was involved and had a part in creating the proposal for that area, smart grid-wise. So we kind of flash this around every now and then. This is off-the-shelf concepts. So you can think of these as just things you purchase or energy lifestyle technologies. And I got a series of questions that I just want you to think about. What if your elderly grandparent that you're concerned about living alone, their house is actually controlled or monitored by voice control? What about if thermal imaging technology could actually improve insulation techniques? What if your cell phone, that everyone has the capability of nowadays with data plans, could actually operate thermostats, load control devices, or their new LED TVs? Lastly, what if your house was sustainable through the use of electric vehicles and PV or photovoltaic? The question shouldn't be what if. The question should be, we have this. What enhances the customer experience? All these products you see up here today, you could go and buy at your local hardware store or home improvement store. The interface is the thing that is lacking. Right now, they're communicating over a Wi-Fi network, not a Zigbee network. So if you think of an integrated home, what's an integrated home? It's basically the internet or your broadband communicating with a gateway, which is just a simple bridge of the two wireless technologies. And your red is your Zigbee network, which enables everything in the home, the electronics, to communicate. And that gateway is also present in the smart meter. So you really have two avenues into the home. You can go through the internet and use some of these products, clouds, and actually get on the web and view a home display unit's web portal access, or you could go through the meter. And an example of a communication you want to go through the meter is, how about a demand response event? So when that price of energy is very high, the utility could actually send a message to the meter, to some of the smart devices in the home, mainly a thermostat, you would think, or a load control device, and say, hey, the price of energy is high, you've invested yourself and your home into this program for demand responses. can I take control of your load? Or do you want to take control of your load? And you might argue, well, I don't want to do that. I don't think my grandmother's going to want to do that. But there's incentive built in the rates. So if you allow this to happen, you actually reduce your bill. And again, what's the benefit to the company or the utility? Well, if you lower load and you shed peak off, you shed demand off the peak and the shoulders, we potentially would not have to build bigger infrastructure or purchase energy on peak times. This one is, I think the utility does a very poor job at this. Modernizing the grid, not modernizing the grid, but then tying those items and those new initiatives to benefiting customers. And,
Is that an issue with the last mile, Nick?
I'm sorry?
So here's what I think I heard you say. What I think I heard you just saying was, we can modernize the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Where we struggle is getting to the customer. So is the
It's
issue the
explaining-
last mile?
It's explaining those benefits to the customer.
Okay.
So when I put an advanced capacitor control up there, how many people in the room have any idea what that would do? Maybe this is an engineering group, so this is a biased population. But if I tell my grandmother that, she's like, nah, what does that matter? So our thought is tying some of these grid devices to actual customer benefits. And I've stripped this slide down quite a bit to actually show those. One, we want to test the two-way communications from the utility to all of these devices. So when I talked about metering technology being mesh and meters talk to meters, it's not the same on the distribution system. We actually want direct contact or point to multi-point to all these devices. So it's a lot quicker speed. So we hope that these are going to enable renewables, energy storage, and electric vehicles. We hope that this is going to enhance reliability. So how does that happen? Well, we actually could find outages faster. The mention to earlier about storms. This one's very near and dear to my heart. I don't know how much you guys were affected here or how many are from upstate New York, but in Massachusetts, where we also serve, the October storm, as we call it, and Storm Irene was devastating to the utility and the customers that were supported by the utility. The whole statewide, and the whole coastwide, I should say. It was just amazing to me, or discouraging to me, I'm not sure which it was, that we didn't know which houses were out. We didn't even have AMR in some regions. So my storm duty on the first 2 days was damage assessment. I literally drove around in a truck with another engineer, substation engineer, and looked at switches or fuses and wrote down which phase was up for the whole day. Brought that information back, and then teams in the evening assessed where we needed to deploy teams to fix those problems. And then the other frustrating part about it, the last days of the storm, where we were actually back to full performance, we didn't know it. We didn't know who had power. So my task the last 2 days was actually to go up to someone's meter, go around their house, look at the meter, seeing if the disc was spinning or if it was on. And if you talk about frustration, people get out of their truck, utility hat on, they haven't had power for 5-6 days, and now I'm sneaking around the side of their house trying to look at their meter.
And then Ron. In another century, there was an ice storm, 1991, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, you don't want to wake them up, you don't want to walk in their yard. The lighted doorbells in suburbia, that's how we figured out where the power was on.
And we actually, in an area I had that was very rural, let's say, we were hoping we had situations like that, because we drove on several long driveways I'd say, you know, between a quarter and a half mile long up in the mountains in Massachusetts. And one sign, I'm writing all this stuff, so I'm not really paying attention too much to the roads. I'm looking at pole numbers, and my partner, the driver, was like, "Hey, Nick, look at this sign," as we're approaching it. And I'm kind of struggling to put my glasses back on, and I see just, "You're in range." All of a sudden, we just kind of look at each other and we're like, "Nah, we're going to take it for granted." So we just turned around. And they actually, the lady that lived there, drove up and followed us out and asked us what was going on, because they were scared. They hadn't had power for a while. They were scared someone was trying to steal their generator. And lastly, just to kind of wrap it up, policymakers have unleashed significant customer value locked regulatory initiatives in this century that we hope we can utilize. We need to understand customer values again and addressing their behavioral considerations. And lastly, I thought this was kind of a good bullet. Technology will be disruptive. I think everyone kind of knows that. They have a cell phone, but sometimes they just wish it was off. But it's also an enabler. So I think us as a utility, the last part goes with what we want to do is those who manage through it the best will succeed. So again, that was kind of a high level of what National Grid's doing. And any questions, let me know.